more famous in that area.
You know, my mother always told us that, you know, if somebody introduced you, especially if they do it like that, she would tell us that flattery, like perfume, is to be smelled and not swallowed. I appreciate all of those things that you indicated that I had been involved in and all of those things. Although I must confess that whoever sent the bio off sent an old one, and it's not current at all. As a matter of fact, I'm no longer on the Ways and Means Committee. I was honored to serve on the Ways and Means Committee when Democrats were the majority in the House of Representatives. Since we are no longer majority, we lost 3 members of that committee this past month or so. And now I serve on the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform, where I am what is called a ranking member of a subcommittee that has been designed to look at reforming health care delivery. One side wants to eliminate basically health care delivery, and the other side wants to protect it. That is the bill that we passed last year, and my chief responsibility there is to defend the health reform bill that we passed in the House last year. I also serve on Homeland Security, which is a new committee for me because I've never served on Homeland Security before. I tried to get my committee back, which had been education, but Democrats lost 13 members off the Education Committee this session, because every time you get a new majority, you realign things and you change things. But it's good to be here. And I want to congratulate the foundation and all of you for being engaged and involved in these kind of discussions. I think they are vitally important. As a matter of fact, I think they're absolutely necessary, because it's been my experiences that the more people learn about each other, and I was struck by the fact that you were celebrating Black History Month this month. And I think many of us hope that we will ultimately get to the point in America where you're not necessarily identified on the basis of race and ethnicity, but you are identified simply on the basis of being an American. And I think that is a goal. And although there's nothing wrong with race and ethnicity, as a matter of fact, all of us had some. All of us have some. And all of us started someplace. But I also think that people came to this country, even those like my ancestors who didn't come voluntarily. As a matter of fact, they came in the holds of ships, packed together like sardines in a can. They didn't know where they were going, how they were going to get there, what would happen to them if they did, but nevertheless, they came. And deeply embedded in their hearts and minds was something called faith. That is, they had faith that somehow or another life was going to be better for them at some point than it was at that time. And I suspect that that has been the case with practically every group that has migrated or immigrated to this country. The feeling that somehow or another life is going to be not only different, but it's also going to be better. And I think that this country, by and large, has proven to individuals that that can in fact be the case. I was thinking the other day when the fellows sat in a room and wrote the words that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. They really meant men. There weren't any women there. There were no ladies, and it was not just a generic saying. I mean, they actually meant that all men, and they didn't even mean all men. They meant all white men who owned property are all white men who were considered to be people of means, that they were created equal because they were the only people that they gave the right to vote to. Of course, African Americans who were in the country were counted in the census. Matter of fact, I met with the director of the Census Bureau this morning, and I was kind of mused a little bit because I told him that African Americans were counted as 3/5 of a person in the Constitution of the United States. That the slaves who were in this country, when they had big compromises, they had the Great Compromise, which divided up how you get representation in terms of having the House and the Senate, all the big states, and everybody always want what's in their best interests. The big states all said, look, so let's have representatives on the basis of population. The small states says, oh, that's not fair. How are you going to just do it on the basis of representation? I mean, there ought to be a better way. And that's when they had this big compromise and they said, okay, we'll give you 2 senators for everybody. If you don't have but 10 people in your state, we'll give you 2 senators. But of course, we still have not given the people in Washington, D.C., that's got close to 1 million people the right to vote. I mean, so our perfect union has a lot of imperfection to it yet. People in Washington, D.C., they don't have any representation with voting rights, although there are other places that have far fewer people than they do who actually have 2 senators and a congressman or a representative. But they decided to divide that up, and you get 2 senators and you get representation based upon population. Of course, when they got to counting the blacks, the Southerners who had slaves says, oh, let's count up all these people we got here. The Northerners says, no, how can you do that? They're not even, they're slaves, so you can't count them. So they argued and negotiated, and ultimately they agreed. So I'll tell you what, we will count them as 3/5 of a person. That's called the 3/5 compromise. Lots of people don't know about that one. Lots of African Americans don't know about that one. Lots of African American children don't know about that one simply because they've never been taught. My mother used to always tell us, if you're not taught something, you just simply will not know it. It's good to see my good friend, Johnny Johnson. I grew up in rural Arkansas, a place called Parkdale. Johnny Johnson grew up in rural Arkansas, 8 miles from where I grew up, a little place called Eudora, Arkansas. And I think both of us recognize that it's not so important where you come from, but what's important is where you're going. As a matter of fact, there's a United States federal judge up in Seattle, Washington, who grew up in Johnny's town. And, you know, Eudora, Arkansas got about as many people in it as there are in this room. And my town has about half as many people as there are in this room. I mean, that's the people be wondering, you know, what's these rural places? Matter of fact, we went down, we named the post office after my uncle a couple of years ago, and I got the congressman down there to do it. And so there were 240 people who lived in the post office's vicinity. I mean, so he sent out 240 postcards because, you know, you got all the names of, and he was shocked after he noticed that all the people came. I mean, as a matter of fact, there were more than 240 people, you know, at the dedication and at the ceremony and that kind of thing. Our country has made and continues to make tremendous progress. From the point where no women were in the room, ultimately women got the right to vote. Hasn't been that long ago, though. And just this past election, it came, you know, we were at a point where we were either going to elect a woman president or vice president of the United States. And of course, we ultimately ended up doing something that many people in this country thought that we would not do at all, and that is elect a person of African descent to be president of the strongest country, most viable country, although that's, people beginning to say, they kind of debate that a little bit when you look at China and how much money we owe the Chinese and how difficult our economy is. Everything that is happening in our country right now basically is being driven by the economy. We are facing the most difficult challenge from an economic vantage point that we have ever faced, I think, in the history of this country. I think it's even worse than the Great Depression. And I think it's worse than the Great Depression of the 1930s because there are more people now who don't have the basic way to earn a livelihood. There were more agrarian communities at that time. And even though people didn't have jobs or they wondered where they were going to come from, they could run out and chop down a tree and they could be heated. Well, you can't take your axe down to people's energy and say, heat me. I mean, that just does not work. Or you could go out and plant yourself something in the back of the yard and have some vegetables and you at least have food. Well, you can't necessarily go down to, Dominic's and, and say, I'm hungry, feed me. Just doesn't happen that way. So our big challenge as we continue to diversify, and we live in a great city. The reason I'm a member of all these caucuses is because I represent, and I'm fortunate to represent, the most diverse piece of geography in North America. There's nothing in North America quite like my congressional district that's called a political subdivision. Of course, I represent all of everything that's down here where we are. My district begins 2000 North, right on the lake, goes right along the lake down to 4500 South. Then we make a little turn and come up to King Drive and go down to 5700 South. Then we go over to Halsted Street, come on back up to 22nd Street, and then everything in between that out to the western suburbs. We represent Oak Park, Maywood, Bellwood, Broadview, Hillside, Forest Park, River Forest, all of what is called the west side, the near west side, the near south side, the near north side. Old Town, Greek Town, Downtown, Chinatown. I represent something called Ukrainian Village. I represent Little Italy, all of the area around the University of Illinois. I represent more hospitals than any other member of Congress in the United States of America in a congressional district. I have more health care institutions and facilities than you can shake a stick at. I have 4 of the top medical schools in the country. We train more doctors and nurses and inhalation therapists and other kinds of people. As a matter of fact, we even train more minority physicians than anybody else in the country, other than the 2 black medical schools, Meharry and Howard. And so it's just a great place to live. It's a tremendous place to be. It's a great opportunity to interact with all kinds of different people, yet we continue to have challenges. And oftentimes people don't know about the challenges of other people. I was struck last night, and I'm probably out of school, a woman who had been accompanying a candidate running for office came to me as I was at their victory party. And she says, and she was crying. I'm saying, well, I know your candidate didn't win. I understand that. But that wasn't why she was crying. She was crying because she told me that she was homeless and that she has a master's degree in business administration. And the only reason that she's not living in a shelter is that she has a cousin who is letting her live with her during this period. And she is a United States Army veteran. And she's intelligent, and she's all of those, but she can't find any jobs. She can't find any way to take care of herself. And she told me she had applied for 200 jobs with the Veterans Administration and had not been able to get either one of those, and sometimes they'll give you a veteran's preference and that kind of thing if you have been in the military. I think the bottom line of what I'm really saying is that if the poet Dickens was around, he'd probably say that these are the best of times in some sense, but he'd also say these are the worst of times. These are times when individuals have more freedom, more mobility, more opportunity, but they are the worst of times because our economy is so constricted and there has been such a tremendous impact on technology and technological advances until you just don't need a lot of people to do a lot of the work that you used to have a bunch of people doing. I mean, technology is so great now. I've seen automobiles being made by robots. I've seen engines come down out the ceiling, fall into the chassis of a car, and the car would shake, and the tire would come out the wall. It's on the wheel, and you go, somebody get in the car and drive it off the assembly line, park it with the other 2,000 that's out there. And that just, I've seen expensive jewelry, I mean top of the line, being made by robots. Robots are doing surgery in our hospitals and medical centers now. And so the big challenge for our society is to make sure that all of our citizens are educated in such a way that they can participate effectively in what we call this high-tech service economy that has been created. And we also have to make sure that there's enough of a balance so that too much of the resource of our world is not in the hands of too few people. If too few people are in control of too much of the resource, then it will never spread out. It's kind of like blood to the body. If there's too much blood on one side of the body and the circulation is not across the board, the people on this side, their legs are going to go to sleep. That's what we call it. You ever been there too long? No circulation. But if you shake it up a little bit, and kind of move around, then it seems to come back to a level of normalcy, and you can do it. I think that's the problem with our economy throughout the world. I think that's the reason people are rioting and protesting in Egypt. I think that's the reason people are rioting and protesting in other countries. I think that's the reason 70,000 people showed up in Wisconsin at a protest rally against legislation that the governor there has put forth. And we've got to try and make sure that we balance things out in such a way that we can keep our economy whole, that we can have the level of fluidity that is necessary, and that we can do what I call live and let live. If some people get too much and others don't get enough, ultimately there is a challenge to how do I get. I don't think the people were just concerned about Gaddafi. Let me tell you, if people reach the point where they're willing to challenge Gaddafi, they're hurting. I mean, they are hurting. I mean, I heard his son say the other day, he said, look, this is not Egypt. This ain't Egypt. I mean, the blood is going to flow here. Well, blood has flowed in lots of places as revolutions have evolved and developed, and people have had to fight for the freedoms that they need and want. Our country has been fortunate. We operate with a level of civility where we can disagree, and yet we can make decisions. We just had an election yesterday in the city of Chicago. We have a new mayor. We're going to have virtually a new city council. And those of us who are elected and have been elected are basically going to work cooperatively together to try and solve some of the problems and deal with some of the issues that exist in our city so that it continues to be described as the city of the big shoulders, city that sits by a decent-sized lake, a city where people can come and know that we've got Wrigley Field, Soldier Field, Marshall Field, and whatever else it is that they need to be comfortable. So let me thank you very much. It's a pleasure, and I'm just delighted to be here with the foundation and all of you today. So thank you indeed. We did pare down a little stuff last week when we voted on the continuing resolution, which actually is not a budget. We don't have a budget for the federal government for this year yet. And next week, the continuing resolution is going to run out. And we're having lots of discussions about shutting the government down. That is, if we don't pass another continuing resolution, that it's very possible that there are all kinds of governmental services and activities, of course, that will not have any money to operate. I vote against big military expenditures, and there are a few other people who do. Generally, we get about 100 votes on that, but we don't ever generally get enough to do much with the military budget. We're spending eons of money in Afghanistan. It's beyond counting. We're still spending large sums of money in Iraq, but we're spending it all over the world for military installations and to support our troops who are stationed, and some of these countries like Somalia, and many of these are becoming more difficult to deal with, and which will necessitate, if we're going to keep protecting our citizens, more money, more troops, more money that we have to send to those areas, which puts at risk domestic spending because you can only go so much. The Republican members of Congress right now have a position that is, the majority of them do, that they just don't want to spend any money. That deficit reduction, that they want to reduce the deficit. And the only way you can reduce the deficit is you're going to have to either find a way to get more money, and of course they don't want to see any kind of tax increases. We just rejected the effort to decrease the tax cut for the wealthiest 1% of the people in the nation. I voted for it. I'm not proud that I voted for it. One of the reasons I voted for it is that the president called me and said, I'm convinced that we just got to do this, that we got to get this done. And, I know how you feel about these kind of issues, but Danny, I need your vote on this. I said, well, Mr. President, since I was always taught, except in some instances, not to follow the leader, I'm going to bite my tongue, bite the bullet on this, and vote for it. But of course, many people did not vote for it, but it passed. There was enough people. So if you can't get money, then you got to cut. And we've got proposals right now to cut everything in sight. Low-income energy assistance program, Pell grants, Section 8 housing for people who are homeless, no pay raises for 5 years for people who work for the government, no earmarks for people who had been promised them. We are in for some challenging times. They're more willing to put that kind of money into foreign activity than they are in domestic activity. And that's kind of last on the list of things to be actually funded. I mean, I'm one of these individuals who, when I just heard someone mention that I got the suicide prevention bill passed. Well, sometimes if you don't know what these things are, what it really was is that it was money that was allocated to go to colleges and universities to provide mental health services for their students because they were experiencing so much anxiety. And that particular year, we had 4 members of Congress whose children killed themselves. And I mean, the bill had been put forth by Representative Osborne, the guy who used to be the coach at Nebraska. He and I both were on education, and we kind of struck up a relationship, Republican fella, and we introduced the bill, worked on it. Lo and behold, as members of Congress who had teenage children and young adult children kill themselves, then people kind of saw more of what we were talking about. We were able to get the bill passed, went over to the White House, the president signed it, and we actually named it after one of the young fellows who had taken his own life. His father is a senator from Oregon, and so we called it the Garrett Lee Smith Memorial Act, named after Garrett Lee Smith, who was the son of Senator Smith from Oregon, who took his own life. And so it's difficult to get that kind of resource allocated now. Republicans and Tea Party people say that's just a waste of time. That's... I happen to believe that as people learn about each other and develop different levels of understanding in relationship to each other, that it promotes harmony in the universe. And so the work that the foundation does, the purpose of the foundation, I think is very important, because I've been told that if there be righteousness in the heart, there's beauty in the character. And it's great work, it's important work, and I'm just delighted that I had an opportunity to be here today and to be a part of what it is that this foundation is doing.